This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, everybody. This is Jack Schmidt up here at Utah State University. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Today's activity of the Colorado River Conversations Project is a monthly conversation with people who care about the Colorado River. And you know, there are many of us who care about the Colorado River who spend most of our lives working for agencies and universities and sitting in offices. And we spend most of our time talking about the Colorado River in meeting rooms. But we should never forget that there are a whole lot of people who care deeply about the Colorado River, whose lives are connected to the river in many different ways, including being on the river much or a large part of their life. And it's one of the objectives of the Colorado River Conversations Project is to bring together traditional stakeholders who come from more of the administrative and research perspective with those who live their lives on the river, because we all have perspectives that are important to share. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mike DeHoff and Pete Lefebvre. Pete Lefebvre, who are the principal investigators of the Returning Rapids Project. We're going to learn about the Returning Rapids Project, which is an effort to document the resources that are within the full pool elevation of Lake Powell Reservoir and document the status of those resources and how they change with the rises and fall of Lake Powell. Because after all, Lake Powell is not just a bathtub accumulating and evacuating water. It is also what were once river resources that now emerge and are inundated. And we ought to take note and think about what the nature of those resources are. So before we start, well, one other element. As we continue, you'll notice in the upper right-hand box of your GoToMeeting a little chat box. If you have a question during the presentation, please just jot down the question quickly or just say, Jack, I have a question. I'm going to field those questions and then I'll interrupt Pete and Mike as needed. I don't want them to have to pay attention to the chat box as we're going. But we will have the opportunity to stop during the talk, certainly as we need. And then we'll continue after. Pete and Mike will be talking for about 30 minutes. So just as a way to introduce for a minute, Pete and Mike, would you just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your lives connected with the river and how you got to this point about being involved in creating the Returning Rapids Project before you launch into these really interesting results and information that you're going to share with us. Just who the hell are you?
So, hi everyone. My name is Mike DeHoff. I have been living in Moab since the early 90s. I grew up with my grandpa dragging me around many places in the Colorado Plateau. I grew up a lot in Colorado. I started really running rivers in the early 90s and have just kind of followed that passion a lot. I worked as a professional river guide and around the river for close to 25 years now. And now I run a small business that builds stuff for the whitewater river running industry called Eddy Line Welding. And this little side project is really just us following a curiosity of the changes that we're seeing, and it's turned into quite a little bit of a treasure hunt. I'll let Pete introduce himself, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Should turn your volume down, Mike. Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Lefebvre. I took my first river trip in 2002 down Cataract Canyon, and then I became a river guide in 2005, and have spent a lot of time on a bunch of different rivers, but a lot of time down through Cataract Canyon, and have been paying attention to a lot of the changes that go on down there with rising and falling reservoir levels, rapids returning, and just the amount of change and fluctuation that you see down there is more than any other river trip I've been on. I watched a movie at one time called Chasing Ice, and it gave me the idea of documenting change with photographs. And so I started taking photographs of side canyons and mud banks and stuff around 2012, and have been compiling pictures. And then I met Mike at Eddy Line Welding, and we got to talking about the river one day and found out that we both had a passion for Cataract Canyon and a lot of the changes that go on in the bottom portion of it. And so we have joined forces and like to go rafting together and take pictures of what's going on. And now we're giving presentations, and it's really come a long way.
It sure has, guys. So we really look forward to hearing from you. So why don't you begin to share your presentation?
Yeah, we're killing our little
sure everybody
here.
Yeah.
All right.
And so, as we're giving our presentation, we made the decision that both Pete and I are going to work off the same computer. So even though we have the little identifier down underneath our names, you'll probably just see Pete and I switch back and forth. And since this is being recorded and some people may be watching this later at home, one thing I'd recommend is if you have a river map of Cataract Canyon around, maybe grab it because it'll help you follow along with some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So we do a lot of work mainly around everything in Cataract Canyon. And just to orient those of you that might not be completely familiar with it, I'm going to get my thing going here. Cataract Canyon is located below the confluence of the Green and the Colorado River. It is a 41-mile stretch that empties into what was Narrow Canyon and Glen Canyon, but what is now waters affected by the Glen Canyon Dam in Lake Powell. It is a stretch where there's been a lot of talk about how the Glen Canyon Dam has affected Glen Canyon, but for our project, we're really paying attention to how the Glen Canyon Dam and the reservoir known as Lake Powell has affected Cataract Canyon. So just some basic facts about Cataract. Cataract Canyon is 41 miles long. It had somewhere between 50 and 60 rapids in it, and it depends on who you talk to and what historic record you reference. When Lake Powell is completely full, it fills to an elevation of 3,700 feet. And this slide that you're looking at right here, this is a river profile that maybe a lot of people have seen, but in short, on the left, you see elevation in feet above sea level, and then on the bottom, you see a countdown of river miles that are counting down to Lee's Ferry, which is the beginning of the Grand Canyon. And we're going to talk a lot about elevations. The level of Lake Powell is measured in how many feet above sea level it is. So like on this slide where it's saying Lake Powell, the elevation is 3,700 feet, and there's the blue line. That's just referring to what Powell is when it's full. over the past 20 years, we have seen Lake Powell go from being full to 3,700 feet to averaging being around 3,600 feet. And so imagine our project is taking into account what happens when a reservoir drops the width of like an 8-lane highway, 100 feet. What happens when it goes down? What comes back? And when that reservoir drops more, where are the rapids and what's coming back? And we use a simple language of really one of pictures, because we want to tell this story to as many people as we can. And so for starters, here's the Colorado River in the heart of Cataract Canyon in all its muddy, messy glory. I mean, the Colorado has its name, the color of red. And Jack, I think you asked me a while ago, come to this meeting and be ready to talk about where you feel like the Colorado River is at its healthiest. And I think here in the heart of Cataract Canyon is where the Colorado is really at its healthiest. It's moving mud. It has great variability. There isn't that much effect on dams. It replenishes beaches. It scours itself out. It moves things around. It is living up to its name. And one of the names that it got nicknamed in the 1920s by the Kolb brothers was because the rapids were so considered fierce by them, they called it the graveyard of the Colorado because it loved to beat up boats. In a modern day sense, in terms of the story of the life of this river, the graveyard of the Colorado comes along in a different way. And that is when it comes into Lake Powell, when it goes underneath the bridge of Highway 95, it loses its sediment, it drops things out. And from my perspective, it's no longer the Colorado River. It becomes impounded river water behind Glen Canyon Dam and to what we know as Lake Powell. This is a picture of Lake Powell when it was at its fullest, when it is maxed out to almost 3,700 feet. And it was this way through the 80s and 90s, and then something happened up in the mountains all above the areas that drain into Lake Powell. And that was a huge drought of, I think in 2002, the snowpack was 30 or 35% of the normal snowpack. And it caused Powell to drop its 100 feet. And so over the course of 2002, 2003, what was a lot of water impounded in the reservoir dropped out by 100 feet. And in a way, some of the life of the river came back because it was flowing across its own sediment. It was carving through its own delta, and it was doing its thing. And some of that, in the most basic sense, is the heart of our story. So now, instead of running Big Drop 3 and having lake water right below it, you're running Big Drop 3 and you're going all the way down to Boat Ramp Butte, sometimes on river current. And so we're just seeing a massive change that's happened in the upper part of Lake Powell and in the lower part of Cataract Canyon. Going further upriver, it looked like this. This is an area right below Imperial Canyon in what we're calling Rapid 28 these days, where this was the high water line, again, of 3,700 feet, referring to elevations. And the historic river level through here was 3,670. So it's a 30-foot difference between that and what was this. So things are just dropping out. You could actually see some of the high water line that could have been left from the reservoir, or could have just been left from the high water of the various years of the Colorado flowing through this corridor. We speak a lot in terms of repeat photography, and we are by no means inventors of this at all. Bob Webb did a lot of stuff. Steve Young, John Weissite, John Dowrin did a lot of ways to try to measure and take in images a way to show people the change, a way to show things, how things are being affected. And so here you can see the railway survey of 1889, and then Bob Webb taking a picture in 1991 of when this area was completely full. And then as the rapid starts to come back in 2011, and then when the chute of 2019 is fully back, and this rapid is what we're calling one of our returned rapids, because we don't really know if it's ever going to go underneath the reservoir level again. We'll see. So this curiosity really with Pete and a few other key folks got launched by this map. If we are on an adventure and a treasure hunt, this is our treasure map. We started going through and looking at all the pre-reservoir, pre-Glen Canyon Dam literature and resources that were available. There was one commercially available river map, and that is the Les Jones scroll map. And why this is such a good treasure map for us is because it shows in the bottom, you can see there's the elevation, another river profile for you. But Les went through and wrote down all the little notes of where the rapids were, how hard they were, and also corresponded them to the USGS topo map that he used, and he scrolled it all out. And so this answers our question, or it gives us information on where to expect when other rapids may be coming back, and maybe how hard they'll be. And if the lake level is at this level and the mud isn't too much of a problem, that rapid may be coming back. And here, I'm going to hand things over to Pete from here. So we're going to do a quick switcheroo.
Good job. All right. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to discuss some of the closer details of this interaction zone between the Colorado River and basically where it meets the reservoir, Lake Powell. And so we've separated it into three separate zones. The returned rapids that have come back since the reservoir has dropped that 100 feet. And then we have what we're calling the carving zone. That is what is being actively carved out by the moving current of the Colorado River because the reservoir is low. And that can come and go, whether, depending what time of the season it is. If the reservoir is high after spring runoff, we have pretty still water, and some of the rapids will go away. Even in the returned rapids area, we have a high snowpack and big runoff. These returned rapids can go underwater for a little bit with the lake backing up into the canyon. And then low water years, we have lower reservoir levels, and those rapids come back. There's beaches. And then the carving zone, the river gets back to carving that mud out and working towards bringing back the original character that was in Lower Cataract Canyon. Then we have below that the reservoir affected area, and that is basically covered in mud. There's no rapids there, and the sides of the river are basically two big mud banks. And usually the current slows down, the silt and the sand and everything in the river drops out, and the water starts to clear up, and then eventually you get into actual still water where Lake Powell is stopping the flow of the Colorado River. And that can change from year to year. All right. So over time, a lot of boaters and different people have called the sediment that dropped out of the river once it hit Lake Powell, the Lake Powell Formation, or some people might call it the Lake Fowl Formation. We feel that John Wesley Powell's name has been kind of tarnished enough. He was not very into reservoirs, so having a reservoir named after him, he'd probably be rolling in his grave. So we decided to start calling the mud the Domini Formation, because Floyd Domini was the major proponent behind building Glen Canyon the dam and Lake Powell and everything. So I may refer to the mud as the Domini Formation from here out. And this is us climbing around on the Domini Formation in a windstorm on a trip where we were documenting some of the change going through there. A lovely, lovely time. Further downstream, you had, and all through the areas where the reservoir was high enough to stop the flow of the river, the sediment would drop out, and when the reservoir dropped in elevation, you were faced with mud banks on both sides of the river. So if you were planning on camping anywhere in this reservoir affected area, you were going to be dealing with some pretty serious mud. And these two pictures kind of depict some of the serious mud that we would deal with. And a lot of times trips would just try to push out the bottom portion of Cataract Canyon once they hit the reservoir affected zone, because there was nowhere to camp, or you were clearing out invasives trying to make a camp, and it was a horrible way to end a trip. We would deal with a lot of tumbleweeds and tamarisk. If you get a good windstorm, it would knock a lot of the tumbleweeds into the river. And you can see here that it would be quite a time navigating your way out of a river trip through all these tumbleweeds. So this brings us to an area right below the returned rapids area, kind of at the top end of the carving zone, near Waterhole Canyon, which would be Rapid 30. It was a popular lake camp back when the reservoir was high. This picture on the left is taken in 1980, high reservoir levels, and people would camp after running the rapids and find a spot for the last night of their trip. And then on the right here, this is what it looks like now, mostly just mud banks and lots of dead tamarisk. But what's nice is, because the river's carved all the mud out in the river corridor, we've got Waterhole Rapid, which has come back down in the bottom of your screen. Very fun rapid. And right above Waterhole Rapid, there's a big, beautiful beach that has been deposited from high flows. And so we're seeing more and more of these rapids and beaches come back, which has been a delight for us river runners. Just below Waterhole Canyon, you get to an area towards the end of the rapids that have come back. And as you can see in this picture on the left, there are still the Domini Formation, the sediment banks lining the river. But down closer to the water level, you can see sand deposition and original rocks that were buried under mud all coming back. And that's all been exposed from high flow. Flows of 40, 50, 60,000 come ripping through there and carve all that Domini Formation out at the top end of the carving zone, and we're left with beaches, gradient, rapids, and even native vegetation coming back, which has really been nice. Another example of returning rapids. The picture on the left is 2015, and a little rapid that's coming back. We're calling it LaRue's Riffle. And I took this picture because basically there was never any character to the water flowing out of the bottom portion of Cataract Canyon. If you did have flow, there were no rocks sticking out, no waves. And I noticed that there was a little disturbance in the water. And so I took a picture, and I matched that picture just last year in 2019. So just in those 4 years, you can see there's boulders sticking out of the water, and LaRue's Riffle is starting to return. And Mike actually found a picture going back to 1921 where LaRue took a picture of one of the Cole brothers coming through this riffle. So we decided to name it after LaRue. And you can see there was big boulders and gradient and waves, and we matched the picture here. And this is Mike coming through in his boat. And you can see that it's starting to return, but it still has more to come. But it's really fun watching these riffles and rapids come back. And that's been one of the main points of our project, is documenting this change as it comes back year to year. Here's a picture similar to Mike's picture earlier, where we can't always find full pool reservoir pictures. And so with a little bit of creative license, we drew in a full reservoir, what it would have looked like in the gypsum area back in the 80s, you could come down through this area and find houseboats and jet skis and people water skiing in this bay here at full reservoir. Now it looks more like this, and you can see the Domini Formation, all the sediment banks deposited in the mouth of Gypsum Canyon. And it's somewhat interesting. The original channel of the outflow of Gypsum Canyon has moved just because of during flash floods, it was flowing across that sediment and decided to pick a different channel. But we are seeing gradient and a rapid starting to come back in the gypsum area, which has been very exciting because Gypsum Rapid was one of the biggest rapids through Cataract Canyon. The big drops, Gypsum and Dark Canyon, were some of basically the big ones through there. So we're very excited to see it come back. Here's a picture from the bottom of Gypsum Rapid. The picture on the left is from 1953. There was a nice beach and a camp right below Gypsum Rapid, so you could run the rapid and have somewhere to stay and have a nice spot to look at the rapid, nice big beach to camp there. And Mike did this recreation shot on a trip just recently. And so it's hard to tell from here, but the rapid is starting to come back. But it shows you how different it looks with the sediment banks, and we're still waiting for the beach to come back and the rapid to form again. From a different vantage point, this shows some more of the change with the bird's eye view. Just in 1 year, the picture on the left you can see is actually lower flow and a lower reservoir level. And there's not a ton of character in the rapid, but a little bit of gradient, a little bit of waves. And then the picture on the right is higher water, which would normally show less character. But since it's carved out all that mud, you're seeing waves and the rapids start to come back. And we actually have a time-lapse camera set up at Gypsum area, taking pictures of the rapid and hopefully documenting the change that's going on right now. Further downstream, this is that mud shot from earlier down at Sheep Canyon, and a picture match shows how different it looks with all the years of carving, the river carving through that area. And there's actually a nice little camp that was there and some sand that was deposited, which has just been a treat for us river runners, because normally this bottom portion was just all mud, no camping, or if you were camping, it was mud camping, very, moonscape, mud cracks and spiders. And now we're getting these beaches to camp on, which is just changing the way the whole trip flows. We're also seeing some cultural sites that are back for us to enjoy, because the reservoir was up over the elevations that they're at. And so the petroglyphs would have been underwater at 3635, and this structure on the left here would have been under at 3650. And it's very awesome to see these cultural sites come back. And obviously they're not as pristine as they were before, but we still get to come up and see what the natives were doing in these areas and view these cultural sites. I see that as a very important resource that is coming back in these areas. We're also seeing native flora and fauna. Lots of native vegetation is taking hold. We're seeing river otters further and further down the canyon area. These river otters were sighted just upstream from Gypsum Canyon, just frolicking and having a good time. And we never used to see them in this area, and you just don't see them in the reservoir affected zone where the water is impounded and slow, little or no current. You just don't see river otters there because it's not technically a river. And we're very excited to see a lot of native vegetation come back. The Gooding's willow stands out to me as probably one of the native vegetations that's taking hold. It's instead of tamarisk lining the riverbank on all the mud, we're starting to see more and more Gooding's willows, and you can see it offering some much needed shade to some weary hut travelers here. And we're also seeing a pretty strong beaver population come back through that reservoir area because they love the Gooding's willows. And so we're really excited to see a lot of this native vegetation come back. Stopping off at Clearwater Canyon here. The picture on the left is taken by E.O. Beeman on the John Wesley Powell trip, 1871, his second trip through, and obviously no reservoir then, lots of native vegetation and character there. And then the picture in the middle, 1998, this was as the reservoir was a little bit lower. People were starting to notice, these changes going on in the side canyons, lots of mud deposited in all the side canyons, and every flash flood, every rainstorm, and also the perennial stream that flows out of there slowly carves the mud out. Every once in a while you get a big flash flood that makes a big difference, carves a lot of the mud out. And that takes us to the picture on the right, 2020. A lot of that mud's been carved out. There's still a lot in there, but we are seeing original rock banks, cliff bands, and boulders, and we're actually seeing some old stumps of original trees that were in there. We're calling them ghost trees, and these trees were in the canyon and then inundated by the mud, but the stumps are still there, which is pretty interesting to see. This is the mouth of Clearwater Canyon. There used to be a beautiful waterfall there and a little swimming pool, and you can see this is a match, the same spot. Lots of mud still in the mouth of the canyon, but it is slowly carving it out and getting closer and closer to its original character. Up in Clearwater Canyon, Mike's been paying very close attention and found this little rock band that came out, and it works as a very good stationary point for us to match these photos. And so moving counterclockwise here, November of 2019, and then you have a big storm that happened, and then you can see there's been landslides, and every flash flood that comes through is working that Domini formation out of there. And so this series of pictures does a good job of showing you in a short period of time how much mud can get moved. And then the big bad one, Dark Canyon, was probably one of the most feared and biggest rapids on all of the Colorado River. And Dark Canyon is way under mud and water, and we would have to have a very, very low reservoir level, which would put it below the dead pool, as they say. They wouldn't be able to generate power. The reservoir would have to be so low for Dark Canyon to come back. The historic head of the rapid was at 3510. And the lowest we've seen the reservoir get in recent history is 3555. Just a few years ago, it was as low as 3568 in the spring of 2019, but it's come back up since then. And so a long way to go before Dark Canyon Rapid will come back. We'll have to see some major changes in the way water is managed in the West, and a lot of things. But someday, who knows, maybe we'll see Dark Canyon Rapid. You can dream, right? So this takes me back to handing it off to Mike.
So moving downstream, one more graph for you to kind of give you some reference points as to where we are. This is, again, we're looking at a river profile. We've got laid out the top of where the reservoir could be, and then fluctuation. We've laid in the Domini Formation, which is this giant delta that the river's carving its way through. We've got about the approximate river channel today, and we're introducing a new character into our story, this thing called Rock A. And it is something that is causing us to have a perched river. And what I mean by that is this. So we went through the whole Gregory Crampton collection, which is up at the Marriott Library. He was the guy who was in charge of doing the archaeological survey in all areas that were affected by Lake Powell. And it was a treasure trove of really cool pictures that helped us with our project. And in that, we found one where, imagine that Colorado River Bridge on Highway 95 looking downstream. You've got the historic river channel going to the left here. You've got our character Rock A, and you can kind of see this valley to the right. That is where the Dirty Devil River comes in. The historic river elevation here was 3460, and now it looks like this in a way. We're going to use this picture to show how much stuff has changed. Sediment-filled channel where it used to go, Rock A, perched river way up top there. Historic elevation of this area is, we think, somewhere between 3590 and 3600. And it is going to change things a lot for this area. I'm going to show you one more picture, and I'm going to back up just to show you all of these again. So here's an aerial view, and this was, again, in 2003, pretty soon after the river dropped down onto its own delta. You've got Rock A here, kind of in the bottom left of your screen. The historic river corridor used to go to the left of Rock A, but now that rock has pushed it over to the right, and here's the Northwest boat ramp that is in the picture, kind of top center of your screen, because we're going to talk about that. But let's just back up again, give you a minute to wrap your heads around that a little bit further. So this is the way it was. This is a perspective on how it is now. And here's an aerial perspective on everything. So thousands of people go down Cataract Canyon every year, which means thousands of people have to use the North Wash boat ramp. Some days you get it and it's okay. When it's above 3620, it's usable. And some days you never know what you're going to get, and it's going to be a muddy, messy, steep, hard thing to deal with that, in my opinion, is very dangerous. You know, sadly, running a welding business, it's job security for me because it also breaks things, but I wish it didn't break things. I think it's not a good solution to the current reservoir levels of what we're dealing with, and I want to kind of show you some of this. So when the lake, I'm going to back up for a second. I want to point out that in July 2019, we had an elevation level of 3622, and that was one of the higher snowpacks that we've had in a long time, and it brought the reservoir up 50 feet. And it's my understanding that it would take 10 or more years in a row of a snowpack like that to replenish the 100 feet from 3,600 to 3,700, just to give you an idea of the amount of water we're talking about. And when it was at its lowest at 3,570 in the spring of 2019, this is what this boat ramp looked like. And the things that you had to do to get your boat out of the water was incredibly challenging. And this is stuff we encounter all the time when we come to this boat ramp. It is something that I hope we don't have to deal with for too much longer. And to give you a view of it, of all the different issues that go into what's going on with the North Wash boat ramp, I did this up for you. This is a Google image. This is a Google Earth image. You can see on the far right of the screen, there's the Colorado River Bridge at Highway 95. You could see Rock A kind of in the top center. You could see where the original channel used to go. You can see where the perched river is. You can see the North Wash boat ramp. And then down here on the bottom left, high and dry, you can see the old height boat ramp. And you can see a dotted line where the solution to the North Wash dilemma is that Glen Canyon has been talking about extending the boat ramp across all the mud that's down there, which would work. I'm sure you can be engineered, but if they don't put the river back in its channel, and in the Perched River area, we get a waterfall, people aren't going to be able to make it down there. It might not be safe. If you look at the Clay Hills waterfall on the San Juan, if you look at the Pierce's Ferry waterfall below the Grand Canyon, it has become an unrunnable obstacle. And this is an issue. So something's going to have to be done with this. We're going to have to put the river back in its original channel to maybe make use of all the infrastructure that has been a ghost town of the Height area. There's a store over there, there's a ranger station, campground, entrance station, bathrooms, and also the ability to deal with the aquatic invasive stuff that's over there, that you need inspections and cleanings of boats coming and going out of Lake Powell these days. There's a lot of new laws in the state of Utah dealing with how to clean your boat out. And sure, you might say, well, we don't need to do all that stuff, but you have to know that in 2005, just a little bit below when the river was dealing with its own delta, there was a waterfall. It was there, it was temporary, it was in the spring, and it went away when the reservoir filled itself back up. But if we're looking at continued low flows or continued low reservoir levels, then this could very well become an issue, backing up a slide, anywhere along where it says the Perched River there. And so doing any work to the old concrete ramp, be it if you are a river runner or be it if you are someone who wants to access the upper parts of the lake, might not be worth it because you still have to deal with the waterfall issue on the Perched River. So I think a very good practical solution for Lake Powell being around 3,600 is to put the river back in its original channel. And I'll fully admit that that right now is probably a plug that's preventing more sediment coming out of Cataract Canyon. So it would be a mutually beneficial thing as far as our project is concerned. I pulled this off the Bureau of Rec site just the other day. I think it was just updated. This is the projections for a 24-month future study of what the reservoir level is going to be. You can see there's a blue line up top that's the max probable. There is a red line and a green line that are pretty married to each other that show min probable and most probable. And you can see how that is going to be staying near or below the 3,600 line for the foreseeable 24 months. And I think this is the future that we have to deal with and have to look at it. We're going to see the river corridor likely continue to restore itself upstream of the Colorado Bridge. And we may very well see some issues down in the Height area because you can't manage the Colorado River without managing the mud. And if it's all about water and elevation levels, then Lake Powell just becomes a giant settling pond, and it's going to continue to create issues. And it's one of the things that we're really going to give a big push to this year is to try to get a better solution to what's going on in the Height area, because it doesn't seem like it's working for anybody there right now. So that's sort of the end of our presentation. Appreciate your attention. For us, what's next is we're finalizing and circulating a river map supplement where we're talking about the returned rapids. In a way, we are dealing with rapids that aren't on any currently published river map. And it's kind of cool, but we're trying to get people to speak in the same language about them. We're going to make a case for revitalizing Height. We've been slowed down a little bit by some COVID purgatory, but we're trying to get our website up and running. We're going to try to do that by the 1st of July. We're going to try to keep telling the story. And so far, everything we do has been out of our own pocket. So we got to deal with some funding stuff, and we're going to go boating and take pictures. You can see there's a picture of this is where our time-lapse camera is right now for our 2020 picture taking, and we'll see what kind of footage we get there as the lake level drops back down and the river keeps carving. So thank you for your time and attention. Jack, we really appreciate the opportunity, and we could do whatever questions you all might want to have.
Mike and Pete, that was truly outstanding, and especially outstanding for volunteers who just care about a place. That was an epic presentation, worthy of any presentation I've heard given to stakeholders at many Colorado River meetings. Thanks a lot. I haven't gotten any questions in the chat box, but let's take a few minutes. If anyone amongst you has a question you'd like to ask, the way GoToMeeting works is if you start talking, you'll have control of the screen. So the most assertive among you might ask a question. Let's go for 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll wrap this up. Does anybody have a question?
Hi, I'll ask a question. Great to hear from you. Can you all hear me? Is this
Yeah, hi
working?
Brenda.
Hi. Great to hear this and great to see your faces and know this work is continuing on. I guess I'll ask a very general big picture question. I have a lot of questions. How can University of Utah and Utah State best help to support your awesome work?
Want me to?
I'm sorry, Jack, I shouldn't have thrown you in there. How can the University of Utah help support your work?
Well, I think, Brenda, for those that don't know, is that just getting the opportunity to go down the river with all the collective knowledge that you all brought. We did a trip with Brenda and a lot of professors from the University of Utah and just a lot of other really knowledgeable people, and just getting to see their perspective on everything really helped a ton. Brenda, you're on my list to talk to about a seed grant once we get a few things established. You know, the biggest thing that I really enjoy about this is that we're not really saying this is our idea, no one else can do it. Is the more people we get involved and the more perspectives we get, it just shines more attention on Cataract Canyon, and it helps people enjoy and understand what's going on down there. And in a weird way, I never thought it would be this way, but it's kind of a sweet spot where sometimes people are recreating just to consume the experience and don't necessarily think about the greater impact of everything. And I think, especially with a lot of the help we got from you all, it helps people think more about their place in the world and the footprint that people leave. And so I think more of what we did last fall, Brenda, will help further that.
Sounds awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Hi, Brenda. Anybody else out there have any questions?
Hey Jack, I just posted one. This is John Whiteside. The sediment that falls into the river includes a lot of organic material that consumes a lot of consumes a lot of oxygen and creates dead zones. And then that dead zone can head into the Colorado River below Glen Canyon Dam. And let's say Lake Powell stays low for 3 or 4 or 5 years. How will that affect the aquatic ecology in Grand Canyon?
Well, thank goodness that Mike and Pete are the ones answering that question.
That's fair.
So the question, just, I don't know if everybody got it, is how does the sediment falling into the river and the reservoir and its organic matter, which creates a dead zone, how does that affect the greater environment? Is that the question, John?
Yes, Mike.
Yeah. And that's
Want me to bail you out?
Yeah, go for it, Jack, please.
Just so, I'm not going to try to answer that, but I just want to make clear, Bureau of Reclamation and the Grand Canyon Monitoring and Research Center have begun to look at the linkages between conditions in Lake Powell and the implications to the Grand Canyon ecosystem. And two of the most important ones are sort of related to the questions that John Weishaupt just asked. There's a pending manuscript now in preparation for submittal. I've reviewed it by some authors at GCMRC concerning the role of the delta sediments in the Lake Powell Reservoir in producing greenhouse gas emissions, and the trade-offs of greenhouse gas emissions in Lake Powell and Lake Mead in relationship to power production. Reservoir limnologists have been looking at nutrients and have coming to understand that the Grand Canyon is a phosphorus limited system, and to understand the nature of the uptake of nutrients by the delta sediments in Lake Powell in controlling the nutrients that get flushed downstream. I think the best way to answer John's question is to say those critical linkages between what goes on in the reservoir and the nature of the temperature and the quality of the river water that is released into Grand Canyon, we understand it's an incredibly complex system. And scientists are beginning to work on that. And John Weishaupt has brought up a limnological, all right. Good suggestion. John Weishaupt has made a suggestion for another presentation. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody want to get in a last question? Okay, we will send you all a notice of the posting of this on the Center for Colorado River Studies website. We'll have another presentation in a month. These presentations are available to be downloaded and viewed. It's exciting to me that right now listening to us are an array of university scientists, environmental activists, agency personnel, representatives with a strong interest in Native American interest in the river. It's a whole bunch of different entities who are all involved in protecting and caring about this river. And every time we look at another resource, it becomes more complicated. But I can tell you that with people like Mike DeHoff and Pete Lefebvre working as volunteers, they complement and add to this whole effort that we're all involved to define a future for the Colorado River. So thanks a lot to everybody. Mike and Pete, bravo. That was really a first-class effort. Thanks a lot. See you downstream. See everybody downstream.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Jack.